You are watching the Slice Tower Hamlets election coverage ahead of the general election on the 4th of July. Vanessa Hudson is the Animal Welfare Party candidate for Bethnal Green and Stepney. Vanessa, thank you very much for joining us. Can you tell me a little bit about yourself and your experience in
Yeah,
politics?
well, thank you very much for having me on the Slice. It's really an honour to be on. So I have been the leader of Animal Welfare Party since 2010. I have lived in Bethnal Green for the past 15 years. And I got involved in politics in a very roundabout way. I was a vegan runner, and through the Vegan Runners Club, I found out about the formation of a new party back then called Animals Count. And I was really interested in kind of what it was all about. I went along to a meeting, and after that first meeting, thought this is something I'm really passionate about. I really believe in what this party's aiming for, and eventually I took over the leadership, and I've been the leader of Animal Welfare Parties. It's now known since 2010.
And I should say before we get stuck in, you don't yet have your manifesto out, but we do have a list of the policies that you would like to put forward and you'd like voters to consider when making their choice. Some people will already have sent off their postal votes, but when making their choice for the general election. Of the 17 policies that you have got
Yes.
out, your focus is really on animals first and foremost, almost to the exclusion of other
I,
things. You've got one policy that is a human first policy, I
I beg
suppose
I would
you
beg to
might
differ
call it.
slightly. In fact, we take a
Go ahead.
slightly different approach. We say that
Yeah.
99.99% of life on Earth isn't human. Only 0.01% of life on Earth is human. So we're all part of actually a very intricate ecosystem, a system of biodiversity, which is currently under major threat. It's in crisis. We're part of that ecosystem, and our own survival is under threat because of the way we've treated the natural world and animals within it. So we are ourselves under threat. So our key focus for us, for our party, is to prioritise the biodiversity crisis and the climate crisis in all human decision making. Because if we don't do that, we then don't ensure a long-term future for ourselves. And we would say, everyone would see the significance of that. It's about securing a sustainable future for us, for our children, and for our grandchildren. So we do believe that actually all our policies are focusing on that long-term sustainable future for everyone. But beyond that, we're saying actually there are these issues that most of our politics has ignored previously, and actually they also merit being included in our political discourse, in our political decision making, and that's the animals. And they are, most people don't even think about this, but the animals are actually in the majority in our country. There are millions more animals than people here in the UK. And I tend to believe that we are a little bit speciesist in the way we think, the way we approach politics. We think about our own species. It's really easy for us to ignore what else is happening in our country. We have a huge animal population, the wild animal population, the companion animal population, but perhaps most problematic of all, we have a huge farmed animal population, millions bigger than our human population. And it's that almost no politicians are talking about. It's a major threat to the environment, to our own health, and it really needs to be aired in the political debate.
Okay, I'm going to pick up there. You mentioned bringing it into the political conversation. And, of the policies you've got, you don't have policies that focus especially on sort of issues that might really matter to people in Tower Hamlets. Is your campaign a publicity stunt for the issues that you think need to be included in the political discourse?
Not particularly a publicity stunt. No, we've been standing in elections since 2009, so a long time now. I've stood in several elections myself. We believe these issues really matter, and each time we stand, the number of votes goes up, and that shows that there's growing support for these issues. So Tower Hamlets is an incredibly diverse borough. You know, there are people here who also really think that these issues matter, and I do believe that on my leaflets, which are going out across Bethnal Green and Stepney from this week onwards, on the back of the leaflets are our key policies for this election. On there I've got the policy of the fact that we need to stop the transit, the import of live animals, including monkeys, macaques, from other countries into the UK to supply the animal testing industries. And I don't really think there's a single person who would read that policy and go, actually, you know what, I think that sits well with me. I don't mind flying macaques in from Mauritius into Manchester Airport to supply the animal testing industry. That's normal. That's the year 2024. That's the best we can do. I don't think that, most people are compassionate at their core. They do care about animal issues. And when you raise them, they say, actually, you know what, you're right. These issues really matter. The point we've arrived at now in our society is that our exploitation of the natural world, and that includes our exploitation of animals, has led us to a point where our own survival is threatened. And that's where we know it's gone wrong. And that's why it really is an emergency to start doing things differently.
Completely. As you say, you've contested the general election in Tower Hamlets. You've run yourself for London Mayor, and you actually ran the campaign for the Animal Welfare Party's London mayoral candidate this year. That mayoral candidate didn't perform as well as other candidates. I think Count Bimface performed better. Clearly, the message that you're putting forward, that you're saying people are engaging with, the message isn't getting through enough to win votes.
No, I disagree. I disagree. So in the mayoral election, so we contested the mayoral election this year, and we contested it previously in 2021 when I was a candidate. There was definitely an increase in votes by many thousands between 2021 and 2024, much better than we expected, in fact. But our reason for standing in the mayoral election is so that we might be elected to the London Assembly. And we see there now we're at about 1.7%. We need 5% of the vote to win a seat on the London Assembly. We're on track for doing that. We know it's not going to happen overnight, just the way it didn't happen overnight with the Green Party and other smaller parties. So our political system in the UK, as we all know, it's incredibly difficult for small parties to make headway. We know it's a long-term project, and we're prepared for that because it's so important. We can't afford to sit back and say, oh, it's difficult, we're not going to do it. We are in this game. We know it's difficult. We wish it wasn't. We wish that we had a more mature, more grown-up political system, one that fits the current crises we're in at the moment. We wish we had a proportional representation. We are where we are, but it's important that somebody is speaking up both for animals and the planet.
I respect your conviction. I absolutely do. How are you funding your campaigns? It's really expensive running for national office.
Here in the UK, all our political activities are funded by either membership or donations. Obviously in the UK, we don't receive government funding for our political campaigns. We are part of a much wider group, an international group, the animal politics movement, and it's a real joy to hear that for them in France, for example, in the Netherlands, for their political work, they do receive government funding. And I think they do have a much more mature approach to politics in those countries. I think we're in a real state here with our politics. We have very high levels of voter apathy. Voter turnout is not predicted to be great. And we look at why, and it's to do with the way politicians have conducted themselves, our first past the post system. We really have tremendous work to do to get voters, young people involved and feeling like being involved in the political life of this country and this constituency is something worthwhile and important for them.
Let's get stuck into some of your policies for this general election, shall we? You've got a policy that I was surprised to see referred to the New Forest, but you're a long-term Bethnal Green resident, and our big natural space, Victoria Park, is kind of coming under threat from commercialisation. It's something that residents really care about, and I wondered why there wasn't a specific policy for Victoria Park. Is that something you could talk about?
We've published our key policies for this election. We are standing candidates in other areas. We are standing two candidates, New Forest East and New Forest West. That's why we've mentioned the New Forest in our key policies. But of course, in our wider manifesto, which is about to be published, we have always said that we need to protect green spaces, and in our policies for London earlier this year, we spoke about the urgent need to protect green spaces. In fact, we need to rewild vast areas of London. We need more tree planting. We need greater education for the public on why areas of biodiversity matter, what they mean, what the different species are, why we should care about protecting them. It's a citywide, in terms of London, it's a citywide plan that we need. And so, of course, all green spaces must be protected.
Of the policies that we've got from you so far, as I mentioned before, they're quite animal forward, and gave me a really interesting answer as to why you feel that that was not an accurate interpretation. The one policy that is really human forward is calling for a ceasefire in Gaza, and that's something that's of real significance, particularly in the seat that you're contesting here in Bethnal Green. Is it something you'd like to talk to me about? Why you felt that this was the human forward policy that merited absolute inclusion on your list of
Well,
17 policies
I
ahead
would
of your
just take slight
manifesto?
issue with that. We also have a strong policy on health. We talk about how you can save NHS funds by promoting plant-based.
Or if I might, it's a policy on diet more than it's a policy on
It's
health.
for the NHS that the savings will be felt. It's a public health policy that it's a win for planet, win for human health, win for animals if we urgently transition to a plant-based food system.
Let's get stuck into diet in a second because I think it is a really
So
interesting
we believe
policy.
that that's also a human-focused policy. On Gaza, we're saying yes, we have supported all calls for an immediate ceasefire in the Israel-Gaza conflict. We've called for the free flow of aid into Gaza. We've called for the protection of all civilians. We've called for the immediate release of all hostages. And yes, we've agreed with all calls for the UK to end the sale of arms to Israel.
Diet, let's go back to it. You are proposing, let me see if I can find the wording for this, improving human and planet health and saving NHS funds by leading on an urgent transition to healthy and sustainable plant-based diets. I imagine when you're on the doorsteps, is this the policy that people bring up with you the most, want to talk about the most?
It depends where we are and where we're having this conversation. Most people are curious to know what it means. I can tell you it's a very different conversation to have this now than it was 10 years ago. 10 years ago, people kind of said, what do you mean? Now, everyone's aware of why we need to switch to plant-based options. Everyone's aware, for example, that oat milk is a much better option for people, planet and animals than dairy milk. You know, these conversations, they're already out there in offices, on TV, in adverts. You know, in everyday conversation, this is already, you know, part of the narrative that we know about, that we need to switch to plant-based alternatives. But what we're saying is that government needs to lead the way. There are some levers that are uniquely available to government to lead on an urgent transition to a plant-based food system. Government could be doing that for too long. They've done absolutely nothing. Here we are at a point where we've got, you know, a population of 7 billion, expected to be 10 billion by the year 2050. Almost no serious conversation about how we're going to feed a human population of 10 billion by the year 2050 unless we do things differently. So we can't carry on having this animal product-based diet that we've had. We've got to change. So it's already too late, but now we need to urgently act.
That's your only policy that touches on the NHS. The NHS is, when we speak to readers, their biggest concern. Is that the only way that an animal welfare party would be able to protect our welfare state, is by um, insisting on a move to
No,
plant-based diets?
obviously, as you mentioned at the beginning, our full manifesto is not yet released. Like many political parties, you know, there's been a kind of a flow of when the manifestos are released. Our full manifesto isn't out yet, but we have in the past, our full manifesto has spoken about how our society needs to be based on compassion, sharing our resources. It's not a civilized society if we have some people doing well and some people not doing well. You know, the measure of a civilized society is that we're caring for the health and well-being of us all. So we absolutely support the NHS and all forms of welfare. You know, the welfare state is not something we're opposed to by any means. We are, our philosophy comes from a point of compassion and sharing, as a kind of sign of a progressive society.
Um, would you support tactical voting for the needs of animals? Is there a party that you could support that you would say is better than other options?
In this election,
Mm.
yes, we have quite often said that where we're not standing, we think that voters should do their own research and look into other parties that have strong or good policies on animal protection and vote for those parties. Yes, we have said that in the past. Yeah, we're not opposed to saying that other parties also do good work. We're
So there's no one you would advocate for?
In which constituency, or do you mean overall?
Overall, if a voter were wanting to make a sort of tactical vote for a national party, is there one that you feel represents the needs of animals well?
There are other parties that we think they do a better job than others. So, for example, we don't think the Conservative government have done a good job with animal protection. They've promised several things that they've then backtracked on and not delivered. Foie gras, for example, fur. That Labour are saying
Yep.
that they would bring in a ban on these if they win the election, and if they live up to what they've promised, that would be great. We don't think Labour are strong enough on animal protection issues. That's why we exist as a party. If we thought another party was doing the job well enough, we wouldn't exist. We're a testimonial party. We speak to the highest possible policies on animal welfare and the environment. We put those policies out into the ether. Other parties can adopt them and take them as their own, live and breathe life into them. And if they do, we can pack up and go home. None of us are in this because we want to be politicians. We're in this taking part because we feel no one else is speaking about these policies and they have to be spoken about.
This sort of brings us back to the conversation that we had a little bit earlier. You're a party that exists for protest and for amplifying a set of concerns. You're not really running for office.
We've won a second councillor in Hexham in Northumberland earlier this year in January. So we have a councillor in Northumberland. Prior to that, we had a councillor in Alsager in Cheshire. So we've had two councillors so far, and we absolutely are serious about being elected. We're part of a much wider political movement. Our colleagues in the Netherlands have 3 MPs in the Dutch lower house, two in the Senate. In Australia, we have colleagues, MPs elected in Portugal, in Germany, in the European Parliament. The list goes on.
But with all due respect, those aren't here.
The animal protection movement is one of the fastest, politically speaking, is one of the fastest growing political movements around the world. We're a proud part of that.
Completely, and it sounds like you're doing brilliant work to amplify that. But we're 2 weeks out from an election. There isn't a manifesto that voters can refer to for the Animal Welfare Party. And as you say, you aren't running because you want to be a politician. You're running because you want to amplify animal first policies.
No, we're standing for policies that benefit us all, people, animals, and planet. The point we're making is that if we don't address these issues, our long-term future is not secure, it's under threat. The point about the manifesto, for example, the Welsh Conservatives have launched their manifesto today. It's a very short election schedule, so to dwell upon when a party launches their manifesto, I think is missing the point about whether they're serious about being elected. We are serious about being elected because we already have been. So we already have councillors who are doing a great job where they are. We know that the long-term future of our parties, we will be elected in other places. I'm pretty sure that for all the other candidates standing for election, we're quite sure that Labour will win the seat in Bethnal Green and Stepney. That's quite obvious to anyone paying attention. So the question about whether we're serious should also be asked to the other contenders. I think it's unfair to say that you're not serious about being elected based on the fact that you think our policies are focused only on animals. It's very clearly the heart of our aim, existence, is to improve the long-term viability of our planet. That benefits all of us. It's a complete mistake that we're.
Well, let's look into that for Bethnal Green and for Stepney, where you're standing. How would an animal welfare party and how would politicians that have animal concerns at the heart of their policies, how would they improve our local area? Because I think that's what voters would want to hear. We aren't looking at policies that improve social welfare or the NHS or education, but how would animal focused policies improve Bethnal Green and Stepney?
Why aren't we looking at the NHS? Why aren't we looking at that? Sorry, I've.
Well, they don't appear to feature in your policies.
Well, we've only so far published our key policies, and then our full manifesto is yet to be launched. But yes, those kind of social policies are very important to us, and we're fully aware the issues that matter. to people in the constituencies where we're standing. So we're fully aware that the cost of living crisis is key for many people. We're fully aware that concerns about crime are key for many people, concerns about the NHS not being able to get a GP appointment, and then when you are, the long waiting time to be seen by a medical professional. We're fully aware of the issues that matter to local people, the rise of food banks across Tower Hamlets. Of course we are. So it's not that we see animal issues in exclusion, we see them as part of this conversation, that we can't afford any longer to ignore these.
All right. Well, if you had a sort of message for voters in Bethnal Green and Stepney before we sort of conclude, what would that be?
It's that first of all, I applaud you if you're going out to vote on the 4th of July. It's wonderful to
We like to
express
hear
your
that.
opinion. It's wonderful to be part of the political debate. And I hope that you will consider Animal Welfare Party's policies and the heart that we've shown for the long-term viability of our planet. I hope you'll take that into account.